Okay. Okay, so let me share the screen. Okay, awesome. So I hope everyone's doing okay. Welcome to week 7. So today we're going to talk about ethics, which this week's lecture is going to be different because we're not going to talk about a specific research method per se, but it's about what should you do versus what you should avoid when you conduct research. And so it's about ethical issues you should keep in mind when you read research or when you read about research or like about the conduct of researchers. What are the ethical considerations that they have to take into account? And so by the end of this week, so we're going to talk briefly about like the origin of why we have code of conduct for research, but why ethics became so important for research. What ethical principles do we follow as researchers? Things that you should be aware of before and during the research, and after you conduct the research and about to publish it. So we're going to talk about that on Wednesday, like which is ethical matters post research, and also if we get time, like ethics even outside academic research, and to see if they apply to non-academic settings. But first, we're going to watch a video. So let me know if the sound works or not. Okay.
In July of 1972, the Washington Star newspaper broke the story about the controversial Tuskegee Institute syphilis experiment. For 40 years, from 1932 until 1972, the U.S. Public Health Service, in partnership with Tuskegee, secretly studied the effects of untreated syphilis in African American men in Alabama. 600 black men, 399 with syphilis and 201 without the disease, were induced to participate in the experiment. Nearly all of them were poorly educated, impoverished sharecroppers. In exchange for participating, they were promised free medical exams, hot meals, and a burial stipend. The men with syphilis were not told they were infected and were not treated, even after penicillin was discovered to be an effective cure for the disease in the 1940s. Over the course of the experiment, 128 participants died of syphilis or syphilis-related complications. In 1972, when the paper exposed the details, the experiment was still ongoing. It incited public outrage over the unethical treatment of the participants, which led to the experiment's termination that November. The following year, the NAACP filed suit on behalf of the survivors. The federal government settled the lawsuit for $10 million. It also agreed to provide survivors and their infected family members with free medical services.
All right. So, wow. Do people know what syphilis is? Yeah, it's skin. Yeah, skin. It's a sexually transmitted disease and gets to your skin and then even your nails and bones. So, could someone recap? So, what happened? What was the main issue that the gentleman narrated? What's the main issue? Could someone uh, give us a recap of what the story was? So there was an experiment about syphilis. What was the issue? What happened?
I mean,
The
they want, oh, sorry.
God.
Oh, I was just going to say they wanted to see what the effects of untreated syphilis were. So they infected unknowing African American men with the disease without telling them that they were infecting them with something that would eventually kill them, and then still refused to treat them even after they found out that penicillin would, treat that disease because they wanted to see what the effects of it were.
So they want to see the effects of the treatment versus non-treatment, right? Okay. So yeah, they were actually, this is the experiment in which, or which led to the discovery of like that penicillin is effective, right? Um, okay, so they were trying a new treatment. What was the major issue then? If you're trying penicillin or any other medications, what what's the thing that made this study problematic in terms of like administering the treatment?
Was it that they didn't have like consent?
Okay, that's an interesting point. That was like the third point I wanted to address. Was there consent? Ariana, do you think there was a consent in the study?
No, I don't think so.
Why you don't think so?
I mean, because they weren't aware of what was going on fully.
Okay, yeah, right. So you notice in the video, the narrator was saying they were mostly undereducated, like poor farmers, so they didn't were not aware of the full implications. I want to say just to correct something, and by the way, thank you, Emily, for your pursuit. So they did not infect them, but they found people who were infected, but they did not tell them. So they knew that they got infected. They did not tell. So the researcher knew. They did not tell like, "Hey, you're having syphilis." That's one. And then what Ariana was saying. So people were not fully aware of what this was. Okay. Were these participants? Would you say that they were deceived? And you can answer by just nodding. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Why were they deceived? What does deception mean? Like, we had a we had a cure and we didn't give it to you. Why is that deception? Remember what was said at the beginning? Why did people participate in the study? What did they think they were getting? If you remember.
They were gonna get like free doctor checkups and like two other things, but I can't remember what else they said.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Tiffany. Well, you don't need to remember that. Like they were, the point is they were expecting to receive some medical care, right? Some form of medical care and treatment. Did they get any of that? Right.
No.
So is that, yeah, no. So is that deception?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. So there were deception involved. Were the participants harmed? Why? How they were harmed? What was the harm?
A lot of them ended up dying.
Uh, Emily, you can go ahead.
Oh, I just said a lot of them ended up dying.
Yes. So a lot of them ended up dying because they
Weren't treated for the syphilis.
right, right. So you were thinking that you were participating in a medical experiment, but for like 1946 to the early 70s. So for 15 years, you were not actually getting treated. Okay, so you were harmed by like you were those participants were not given the chance to be treated. Okay, so they were harmed. Okay, and so yeah, and so the so this experiment ran for almost 15 to 16 years, and it only broke out in the early 70s, okay, in 1970. So it's from post World War II, right after World War II to 1972, and so there was like a huge public outcry, especially that it followed the civil rights movement. If you know your American history, um, and so that got people like to pay more attention to academic research, to medical research, and academic research in general. So they decided like yeah, like whenever like institutions are running research, they must monitor three things: the researcher motives, how people in the research are being treated in a medical sense and in a general sense, like how I treat you, and the consequences of research for participants and for society at large. And so, in the National Research Act of 1974 was passed, and it set up and said that any entity, any institution that is going to receive federal money has to set up an institutional review board, aka IRB, known as the IRB. An IRB is, we have an IRB at University of San Diego, UCSD has an IRB, every university has an IRB, and this board is responsible for establishing and implementing the research code of conduct. So they establish a code of conduct that is uniform and it's implemented by an IRB in every institution. Okay. And so, what is that code of conduct then? Right. So that code of conduct was based on something called the Belmont Report. So Belmont was a person. So he led a committee talking about like again the issue is talking about research motives, research treatment, and research implications. And so they established ethical principle based on the utilitarian theory of ethics. This is not an ethics class. So I'm not going to tell you the difference between utilitarianism and universalism. But utilitarianism means you look into the effects of something in order to judge if it's ethical or not. The Belmont Report established three criteria or three major principles, to be more specific, three major principles that govern what ethical research is. So the first one is autonomy. Second was is beneficence. I know weird sounding word. And the third one is justice. Okay. So autonomy is mean respect for the participants' free will, that no research participant will go into the study without being fully aware of the implications and fully informed about what's going to happen. So that's one. Beneficence is that the participant would have a net benefit from participating in the study, or at least no risk or very, very like minimal harm, right? So in other words, so the risk or the harms never outweigh the benefits for the participants in the research. And thirdly, fairness and non-discrimination, that you will treat all subjects equally. Yes, by the way, was there a discrimination in that Tuskegee syphilis study? Discrimination based on what?
It was discrimination based on race because
Yes.
they only used black men.
Yes, yes. They only use black men for the control group. For the treatment, then they were yeah. So in medical research, I should have explained this. In order to see if something is effective, some people need to get it or to have it, and some people would not get it. Like with the vaccine, for example, you compare the group that took the vaccine to the group that did not take the vaccine, and then you would like do the like blood level, and with COVID, like you would do like multiple checks, like every 2 weeks or something, and so you will see if it's effective. But imagine if we're saying, you know what, we're going to test the effectiveness of the vaccine. 100,000 people will get it, and 100,000 people won't get it, just for comparison. But it so happened that the 100,000 that who won't get it are all blacks, right? Or like they're all Latinos, or they're all females, right? Like, or based on gender, right? So that's discrimination per se. Okay. Um, so discrimination, even if people don't end up dying, like with the syphilis case, you still discriminated because they didn't get like equal treatment. Okay. So then those three principles gave like 5 or 6 considerations when you're about to conduct research. So the first one is the right to choose, and it equals like two things: right to consent and right to withdraw, which we're going to talk about in details just in a moment. A right for honesty and not being deceived. So deception is not acceptable, except for like a very special exception and like condition, and we're going to talk about that. Right to privacy, so it's also about autonomy. So the right to choose and privacy related to the autonomy, and clear language as well. So we're going to talk about these one one. So right to choose involve not only the right to consent. We're talking about informed consent. So can someone tell me the difference between just consent and informed consent in particular? What do we mean by informed consent?
Like they know the full details and implications of what what they're consenting to.
Right, yeah. Full details and implications. And so an informed, so a consent, we're saying, like Evelyn, you are going to be participating in a medical study, okay? And that's the only thing you need to know, okay? Is that informing you of anything? Okay, yeah, okay. So no, it's not informing at all. Where if you say, hey, you're about to take part in a study about allergy to flowers, or like allergy to some, like, I don't know, type of bees, and then yeah, we'll let you sit in a room and we will expose you to different like smells or materials, something. Okay, that's informing you of the full implications. Okay, so it's informed consent, all right, not only like consent. And then voluntary participation. So the participants can freely choose to opt in. And so, assuming, for example, I'm a researcher here, and in my research, I just make you do an assignment, and I inform you about what this research entail. However, if it is a class assignment, it, would the participation be voluntary or not? Would it be considered voluntary or non-voluntary? You can just nod, yes. If I assign the research for class and you have to do it, then is it voluntary? Yeah. So it's not voluntary, right? Because yeah, you as a student cannot choose not to participate because there will be harm on you, right? Like I'm going to deduct points. So that's won't be actually the right to choose. Even if I say, hey, I informed them about what it entails. It doesn't. You have to have both, right? Informed consent and voluntary participation. Would prisoners, if you're doing research on prisoners, that's a big issue. Do they really have the right to participate? Yeah, that's tricky, right? So yeah, it has to be something like people actually have autonomy to choose. So remember autonomy. And then we have the right to opt out. So that is to say, even if people have the right, even if people consent voluntarily and willingly, they must have the right to withdraw at any moment during the research. So when they're about to try, or in the middle, even right before they're about to finish, they should have the full right to opt out. Why do you think that is necessary though? Why you should have the right to opt out? Can you think of a scenario in research where you might think that I actually need to opt out of the research?
Maybe if the research is going to cause you physical harm.
It, so I just got I didn't hear you clearly. Could you say that again?
I said, yeah, maybe if the research is going to cause you some sort of physical harm, you might choose to opt out.
Yes, yeah, yes, exactly. Um, so we're conducting research about, let's say, weightlifting, or like maybe like your haptic senses, and we're asking you to touch different things, if they're like hot or cold. Some researchers do that, by the way, and you discover that actually, though, I'm not feeling comfortable. I wanna walk away. Can you think of an example like in communication research or media research where in the middle you might feel the need to opt out? Can you think of a research like that for studying media effects? Something about the content, maybe the setting. Let me ask you a question. Should you have the right to stop watching disturbing content? Yeah. So yeah. So even if in communication research, people do research these type of things, and if any participants for any reason they feel comfortable, even if they initially thought they would be, they should have the right to withdraw. And this is similar, by the way, to how our understanding evolve around consent. So even if you take, let's say, if you took, not if, you should have taken the anti-harassment training, right? The idea is like a consent can be given and withdrawn at any point, right? So even in personal relationships outside of research, for any reason, whether you think it's logical or illogical, as long as the person starts to feel uncomfortable or just for any reason wants to withdraw, they should be able to withdraw without any consequences whatsoever, right? Um, and so, related to the idea of like informed consent, uh, all of these forms of, like, when you talk about research, like you post about it, and the consent form have to be written in a clear language. So in other words, you cannot just use jargon, whether it's like medical jargon or like theoretical jargon, to explain the study. The informed consent must be written in a language that someone with like an average level of education, like any adult, can read. If children are taking part in a research, you also have to make someone explain to them. Of course, their guardians have to consent, but also the children must be explained to them, like what's going to happen in a language they understand, right? Because remember, the issue is informed consent, so language clarity is key. So your research must match the audience, the language used in the consent form must match the audience age, education level, level of comprehension. If it's like any things mental or like psychiatric, but you have to also take into that in account, and you avoid technical jargon. So let's say in medical research, I'm going to tell you about the treatment, but I explained it all on like using those scientific names. You know what the scientific names are, like the ones in Latin that you cannot even pronounce, right? With like 45 characters. Yeah, like I'm telling you, yeah, like this pill contains that, but you have no idea what does that mean. So I have to then to explain to you that substance is the one used in blah blah blah, and it's typically has those effects on your body, or like has those side effects, also in terms that you understand. Okay, so you cannot hide the purpose of your research behind technical or like jargon. And also related to the idea of like clarity is like you have to tell the truth of what the research is about before you conduct the study, right? Um, so if it's about syphilis treatment, you should tell the people about syphilis treatment and that they might be getting syphilis treatment. If it's about, yeah, like vaccine, or if it's about you have to tell them people before. However, here I'm saying most cases, but sometimes you can choose not to tell participants the full truth. Okay, uh, and let me explain, right? So suppose, for instance, has anyone, by the way, heard of subliminal messages? Okay. Mary, can you tell us what do you know about subliminal messages?
Can
Even if
you
it's,
hear me?
yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Um, I'm pretty sure it's like kind of like your subconscious, and it's like kind of like subconscious types of ideas being put into your head. So it can be like audio or like a TV, like some sort of broadcast that doesn't actually say what the message is, but your brain kind of interprets one.
Yes, yes, that's exactly right. And so subliminal messages, and I like to give this example. So subliminal messages is, for instance, inducing some elements in the content that you won't consciously catch or become aware of, but your brain will catch. Our brain catches everything, by the way. And so some examples, and those were given, like if that type of research has been conducted, by the way. So suppose I'm showing you like a scene from a movie, and it's just like a person playing with his kid. They're playing in the front yard, like with like a baseball bat or something. And then I will induce like some frames. You know what a video frame is? Because a video is made of like multiple moving images, right? And so I will introduce or like introduce some frames within that of like a burger, right? and it would be like for like a tenth of a second, and it would be repeated maybe like only 5 times. You won't notice it. So when I play it, you won't notice it. Like you wouldn't know like a burger was shown, but part of your brain would catch that. And so researchers have been studying this, and they found that one group of people would see that scene with the burger, and another group won't would see the scene like naturally, no manipulation whatsoever. Okay, they found that the group that was like saw the subliminal message, so it's subliminal, actually, yeah, expressed the higher desire to eat a burger after they watch the scene. Right? So that's subliminal messages, okay, and it's been done in experiments. Is that a type of deception, though? What do you think? Is that type of research deceptive? And you can tap in the chat if you prefer. And any thoughts? Even if you don't have an answer. Would you consider subliminal messages to be deceptive? Any ideas?
I mean, I think possibly that it could be deceptive, considering that, like, if you don't know that you're being told something, then you're kind of just like, I mean, you're not fully aware of it. So that could be considered deceptive.
Right. So you weren't aware that the burger was shown. So in that sense, it would be considered deceptive, right? Is that the idea? Um, so yeah, so actually, this type of research is allowed, only if you do like a debrief afterwards. So right after you conduct the experiment, and then you get people response, you have to tell them what happened. All right. And so you'd ask why this type of deception is allowed. Well, remember the ethical principles like about autonomy and beneficence and privacy. The issue is, are you deceiving the participants about anything related to that? Right? So deception, for instance, if I tell Terrence, by the way, I want you to fill like a quick survey. It'll only take you 5 minutes, okay? And then you'll get $5 as a reward. He says, fine, 5 minutes, $5. That's great. Then he discovers actually the survey is taking like a freaking 30 minutes. Then it's not really consent. I deceived him about the consent, right? That's about core, like his own autonomy and his right to choose how to spend his time was violated, right? So that's like deception. Or if it's about the beneficence, so I'm telling people, hey, you're getting free medications for like getting a flu shot, but then I experimented with something, a new vaccine that I'm developing, and these poor people thought they're getting flu shots. So that's deception that's affecting the benefits of the people. So in other words, the deception that has like, yeah, so it violates autonomy or beneficence or like does harm, uh, is never allowed. When you, however, saying it's like something not related to that, but it's related to the research question, so do subliminal messages work? Or even for like, remember when we did the like the one with Anthony Davis, right? Like with the promotional post that he's endorsing something, and someone of you, I don't remember who, was noticing also that even in the picture where he's not promoting, he was making the Nike shoes visible. Okay, so some people study, and I'm one of them actually, if subtle endorsement is more effective than like explicit endorsement. So which is more effective? If the celebrity is holding like the Nike shoe like this and endorsing it, and there's a hashtag something something by Nike, or like if he just like in the case of like a basketball, if he or she is like walking and they're wearing a Nike shoes, but they're not telling you it's an endorsement or it's a commercial. So if I'm a researcher, want to see which one is effective, I won't tell my participants what my hypothesis is, or like what's the point of this specific research. Like, hey, I want to test if you think the implicit endorsements are effective or not. Because if I tell them that, it's not going to be implicit anymore. You see the point? So they're going to know what I'm looking for, right? So that's would affect the way they answer. Okay. So in that way, you can just tell them the truth about, hey, you're going to show images from Instagram. Like you cannot lie about that, or like images of like evolving basketball player. Nothing harmful, nothing uh, provocative, but you don't have to tell them about your hypothesis. Is that distinction clear? Sort of. Okay. Um, Something that you can never tell people afterward about, you have to tell them before, is like if you have graphic content or like shocking content, I'm sure you know what graphic means in that context, right? So things that are disturbance, or like for violence or profanity or whatnot. Why we must do this always before the research? What's the point? Why we should have, or we must have this warning? Why is this important to warn about graphic content?
So that the participants can have the chance to opt out if they feel uncomfortable or like they're not going to want to be involved in the study.
Yeah, yeah. And so yeah, I'm showing violent content. So some people study violent video games or like violent scenes. Like I don't know, you're studying the effects of like if you see like animal cruelty or people like getting their heads chopped or something. Yeah, like some people cannot tolerate that. And so they have to be fully aware before you expose them to such content. So in this case, you cannot say no. I'll tell them after. No, because this is critical, and it's directly affected to give them giving their consent, right? Because it's linked to the consent or giving an informed consent and to the beneficence. Because some people could be harmed, right? Someone getting a heart attack or something, or like irritation or depression. So those type of things must be given always must be given before exposure to the content, so people have the freedom to choose to participate or to opt out if they don't feel comfortable at any point. We still have yeah, time. And then also, so during research, there's also the issue of privacy, and it's mostly linked to. So once you collect data, there are two types of privacy. One is anonymity, and the second is confidentiality. Does, does anyone know the difference between anonymous and confidential? Okay, can someone tell me what anonymous means? What does anonymous mean? anonymous.
Not having your identity shared.
Pardon, I didn't hear you. Sorry, sorry.
Not having your identity shared.
Right. So anonymous is when the identity is not known. That's what's anonymous. So if someone is anonymous, just in language, the way we use it, that means you don't know their names. And actually, in research, so if you're conducting experiments or surveys, especially online, even the researcher doesn't know the names of the participants. So I post a survey online. Zoe, Emily, and Eric takes it. I cannot tell how each one of them answered. Right? Even if I knew they participated, I cannot link their answers to their names. They would remain anonymous, and even I wouldn't know if that they participated. So I would see in the survey just like digital codes and the answers. So that's fully anonymous, right? So even the researcher doesn't know the names or like any identification. So not the names of like the student IDs or the email. But it's tricky when you do it online because of the IP addresses. Do people know what an IP address is, right? So if you take it like you can get the IP address, sometimes you can, if you have the right tool, you can know the names of the people in the household by the IP address. Okay, but yeah. But in general, anonymous means you don't know the names. Uh, Confidential is slightly different. What's a confidential? What does confidential mean? If I tell you the information is confidential, what does that mean? Just in the
That it
general.
won't be.
Yeah.
I was gonna say that it won't be shared with anyone.
Yes. So that's what confidential. So when you have like confidential records, that means they're not shared. Only a small group of people would have access to it. And so the difference is like in some methods you can only have confidentiality, but you cannot have anonymity. So assuming my research method was I'm conducting in-person interviews, can the participants have anonymity if it's in-person interviews? So yeah, no, right? Because I, the researcher, would see their faces, their voices, and I could link the answers back to the participants. So I would know how Emily has answered, how Sydney has answered, how Evelyn have answered. Okay, but I must guarantee them confidentiality, and that is to say, those information won't be disclosed. So I would only publish their answers, but they would be de-linked from the names. And so when this type of research, I've conducted interviews and published research relying on interviews. And so instead of saying like when I'm reporting the results, I won't tell them like Zoe, who is a student at USD, answered and this is her full code. No, I would basically give Zoe a pseudonym. She's saying like I would call her, let's say, Emily, so not Zoe, who's a student at USD. It's like a female student at USD, and that's what you would need to know, right, as a reader. And then I'll give the code of whatever topic we were talking about related to the research, right? So if someone else is reading the research, cannot know how Emily has answered. So that's confidentiality, right? So even if the researchers know the information, they are not shared by anyone outside of the research team. Um, and this is the last piece for today. So the issue then becomes privacy now becomes more tricky because if you think about it, with digital technology, we have access to publicly available data that we never had before. And so there's a higher potential for privacy violation. So I'll give you an example. This is a real example. Suppose we're doing content analysis on Instagram users. Okay? So I once participated in a project. We were interested in the content of people who follow Lululemon on Instagram. Okay? And we would download their images and conduct content analysis on them. Should we or should have we be allowed to publish those images in an academic journal? Images that we downloaded from Instagram. That were public, by the way, so we did not hack into anyone's account. Is that ethical? Emily, you muted. Can you tell us? Can you share your thoughts with us?
I'm leaning towards yes, it is ethical because anything I post on my public Instagram, I have released publicly onto the internet. So you don't, I mean, if you were taking like my images and taking credit for them, I think that would be unethical. But if you were like utilizing them for like some sort of research experiment, I think that would be ethical because they're public.
So why did you say I'm leaning and not fully confident that it
Well, I
should?
hadn't convinced myself, but by the time I stopped talking, I was sharing. Yes, I will answer yes, it is ethical.
Okay. Any dissenting or concurring opinions? I'm downloading tons of images from Instagram and they're public, and I publish them in research. Okay. So here's the deal. So traditionally, that was considered ethical, right? Like to publish any publicly available data, and so the images would be publicly available, right? That you post, like you put it public. Again, we're not talking about private accounts here, things that are made public. Yeah, technically you could just post it because it's publicly available. However, because of the idea is that even if you post something on Instagram, people are not fully aware of like how that might have been used even outside Instagram. So like the idea of like me posting my pictures on Instagram public is different than if I realize like some researcher at a random university would take it and then publish it to an academic journal that be discussed by universities all over the world. So that's a different like expectations, and so people now are like universities are revising the code of ethics to say, well, you can actually use the images for research, but you cannot get them published in like in a journal or website unless you get the consent of the individual, right? Unless you get a written consent. Celebrities are different. So, but like if we're talking about like private citizens, that seems to be the consensus. So yeah, we can, for example, remember when we did the content analysis on donuts, but we could pick anyone. Like so imagine in a class exercise, we do this and we pick the account of random girl from San Diego, just doing content analysis, right? Um, so if it's for academic purposes, yes, they're saying that. If you're going to publish it, it's something different because even if technically and people agree on terms of like views without reading it, right? And Instagram owned those images, not the person, but they're saying we're taking something and putting it in a different context. We have some sort of an ethical obligation. So that's one. The other issue, people also don't fully realize how small pieces from different platforms could be pieced together to draw a picture of you. So imagine I'm following Emily's. So not only we look into Emily's public Instagram post, but for 3 years we tracked like her Instagram post, her LinkedIn, her Facebook, her Twitter, Snapchat, and we kept saving all of these, right? And so all of a sudden we could just see Emily's progress. Where did she live in 2018? Where is she living in 2021? The school she went to, the people she associated herself with, all of that, which could then draw a clear picture that people could identify Emily with. Okay, all based on publicly available data, but those connections were made by the researchers. Right? So you see, like how. So the idea is then, if that's going to be the case, that you think that you're going to reveal more about the person, then they should be made aware of that, right? And so people, if you're doing that, they should be aware of where the data is stored, right? And by the way, this only academics concerned about themselves about it. But Emily, I'm not sure if it's good news or not, but marketers use this, what I described, all the time. And this applies to all of you and me. So yes, like there are like multiple digital marketing tools that track all of your social media accounts, browsing history, check-ins, different places to do like what they call a consumer profile. But again, like in academic research, that's like a different story if it should be made possible or not. So that's it. Next time we're talking about the Milgram experiment, which should be fun. Do we have any questions about the materials? Okay, an announcement, quick announcement. So I'm going to post the study guide for exam 1 today. So it's going to be a Word doc, and you're going to see the terms that you should study. Study the slides and the readings. So if things are in the slides, sometimes I don't give the full definition of the slides. So if you go back to the readings, you can find the full definitions. If there's something I did not make clear during the lecture, you find the readings more helpful, yes. But the things I ignored, the things I ignored from the readings, you should also ignore. So I'm going only to test on the things that I cover, right? And that's a long way to say just focus on the things I mentioned in the study guide. The exam going to be, it's on Friday, multiple choice, true and false only. And we're not going to have a class on Friday. So you'd use that time to take the exam. And yeah, it will be posted during class time. Do you have any questions about that?
Do we only have class time to take the exam, or how long do we have to take it?
Sorry, pardon?
Do we only have like our designated class time to take the exam, or how long do we have?
So I'll lengthen the time window. So there's like the time window and the exam like duration. So the time window would run like for 3 hours. So I'll make it like from, let's say, 8 to 11 a.m. That's like 4 hours. But once you started, you would only have the 50 minutes to like 55 minutes to take it. Right? But you can take it at 8, you can take it at 8:30, you can take it at 9:15. Cool. All right. So anyhow, enjoy the rest of your day and good luck.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
I have a quick question about the exam.
Yes, Bridget.
Is it going to have lockdown browser?
No, don't worry about that.
Okay, because my computer sometimes glitches with it. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, my computer as well.
Okay, thank you so much.